Okay, we've been talking about communications. We haven't talked about conflict yet. We haven't talked about negotiations yet. But, oh, wow, this communications issue is such a big issue in business. I mean, it is probably the #1 issue in business because miscommunications causes more grief and causes more unnecessary worry and concern to people than you could possibly imagine. So having some concept of what it takes to be a good communicator or some of the essential ingredients of communications is important in order to manage that going forward, so you guys won't have to put up with as much as the previous generation me has had to put up with. So we've looked at communications. Communications is just the exchange of information. We've looked at this issue of the communications process and why things go wrong, because it is a bit of a process. There's an encoding and decoding process which can cause problems. There's the channel that the message goes through that can cause problems. The channel might not be as clear, like a bad telephone line. There's noise, which could be literal noise on the, this kind of, that's really hard on your ears, isn't it? So that type of noise, or noise in the sense that you're thinking about something that has nothing to do with what is being discussed. So it kind of distracts you. And we also talked about this importance of feedback. So we've gone through and we've looked at formal, informal communication. We know that most organizations do like formal communications. Problem is that most organizations don't do it very well. So as a result, people are stuck in an information vacuum, and they're going to go look for information wherever they can get it. And wherever they can get it tends to be informal communications, their friends or colleagues, gossip, whatever else, and that causes some problems. So largely organizations are responsible for their own internal communication problems, and it has to do with the fact that they don't have a good formal communications situation set up. We've talked about, we saw some videos, and getting past them is the thing. We've seen what causes problems with communications. We've got all kinds of barriers out there, including filtering, where I'm not telling you the whole story. Selective perception, where you're not listening to the whole story. Defensiveness, where you've heard the whole story, you don't like the whole story, so you don't want to hear it anymore. And there's all kinds of examples of defensive behaviors that you can do. There's emotions that get in the way of communications. There's information overload. Wow, it's just too much coming at me. There's the language of work, the jargon, the zip codes, the SATs and the BA-DOs and the ACOAs and all of these sorts of things that people at the workplace might be familiar with, but people outside don't know. And there's nonverbal language. Wow, nonverbal language is facial expressions and all of the things that people do when they communicate that you can see. And if you can't see them, it cancels a lot of the communication process, such as what we're doing here now. You can't see a lot of what's going on. So you can't see facial expressions. You can't see sort of these things. And nonverbal is so important. And the problem with nonverbal, or one of the problems that it comes with, is that you're saying one thing, but your facial and nonverbal expressions are saying something totally different. So I'm having such a fun time, but my face is saying that I'm in pain, that sort of thing. So we got to be able to communicate better. And in order to communicate better, we have to appreciate some differences in people. We know there's gender differences. We looked at some of those. We've looked at cross-cultural, the fact that people are from different parts of the world, or different parts of the world interpret information differently. And we've seen that some of the changes there. We've seen issues with regards to different nations have different power. We've seen how, for example, in terms of the power or personality issues, the power differences and these sorts of things all interfere with communications. That has brought us right up to right here. So we've gone and looked at it so far, and now we looked at something that I have to admit, this is a part of the course that I've always glazed over because it's not as important, I thought. If we understand, it's probably not, it's just a subset of the whole thing. We're talking communications. You have to understand the basics of that. And it doesn't matter if it's over a computer or talking to someone, same rules apply. But whenever we get to this section, I kind of give it short shrift. And this year, wow, I've really had to look at that and say, this is really important. in the context of which we live now. Okay? This is really important. If we think about communications over the last year, we have really largely gone online. So computer-mediated communications has gone up phenomenally. You know, last year this time, I bet you had never heard tell of Zoom. And last year this time, I bet you have never used Teams. And I bet you've written more emails and text messages and teleconference and video conference and telephone conferences this year than you've ever done before. And I think that all of those items are rather unique and rather strange in the environment that we came out of. It's not so strange now. We're into the thick of it now, and we're pretty familiar with it. But the very fact of the matter is, it does mean that we use a different medium this year than we did last year. And as a result, that is causing people some stress and some challenges with regards to how well things are being communicated. So a lot of research has been done on this, okay? And computer conferencing works great at the mechanical job that it's supposed to do, okay? To generate ideas, allow for the exchange of ideas and these sorts of things. But, you know, it's still remote, and it's still in a situation where you lose all of the nonverbal forms of communications. I would suggest that we better get used to it, because this type of system is probably going to get used more in the future than it was. You know, if we think about how long it takes for adaptation to take place, it probably takes years and years and years for adaptation. And really, as of the 15th of March last year, organizations adapted almost immediately. It was a shock to the system that caused organizations such as college to change in how they deliver courses. So by almost any criteria other than generating ideas, computer-mediated groups perform more poorly than face-to-face groups. Thus, less routine communication requires richer communication media. Memos, reports, and emails are fine for recurrent, non-controversial, and personal communications in which information is merely being disseminated. But important decisions, news, intended changes, controversial messages, and emotional issues generally don't work as well in an online environment. They work better on face-to-face. I was listening over the course of the last week. A lot of teachers have been on talking about how one of the big problems they have in dealing with their students now is that not very many of the students, or not all of the students, or some of the students don't turn on their cameras. And in some organizations, like the college is one of them, internal in the college, that is, if the college were to have a meeting of staff, a lot of people don't turn on their cameras. And teachers were arguing that if I can't see the student, I can't know if the student is getting the material. And this is causing a lot of grief for teachers. So, you know, this demonstrates one of the challenges with computer-mediated communication. We've got a bunch, and this particular TED Talk here really hit upon some of the key ones. So let's just take a few minutes to look at this.
I'd like you to think about your favorite space. It might be a cafe, a shop, your home, or some other place. Think about the ambience, the furnishing, what's in it. What does it look like? How does it make you feel? What makes it unique and interesting to you? Now think about your home. Imagine if somebody came in and rearranged everything. How comfortable would you feel? Spaces are really important. The architect Christopher Alexander said we should all be involved in designing our spaces so that they serve our needs and they bring meaning to our lives. But somehow along the way, I think we've kind of lost the path. We're actually designing environments that are making us crazy. I think many of us would be the very worst version of ourselves in this photograph. in this particular space. And I was talking to a group of architects recently, and they said beauty actually doesn't really come up when they're designing. Are you surprised by that? I know I was. In the 1960s, we thought it would be more efficient and collaborative if we put everyone together in a room that looked like this.
be aware of the other person's. Again, this is the same as putting yourself in the other person's shoes, okay? You need to be able to appreciate their perspective. And if that means if you're in a different world or a different place, make sure you appreciate where they're coming from. And always assume differences until you know otherwise. So projection and foreign speakers, for example, if someone has a really good appreciation for English, can speak it really well, that doesn't mean that you have a good understanding of the culture. Okay, so I apologize. This is not as crystal clear as I would like. I photocopied this before, and I didn't get a good copy, and I only realized it when I put it up on the screen there the other day. But it is readable. It's just not as readable as what I'd like. So we just talked about those habits of good, effective communication. Now what I'd like you to do is do this little self-assessment. And effectively, we got 10 questions here, and you have to answer them usually, sometimes, or seldom. And in terms of scoring it, 1, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, you give 3 points for usually, 2 points for sometimes, and so on. And for 2, 4, 9, and 10, it's the opposite of that. So sum them up. So take 5 minutes now and consider that. Okay. Well, what I wanted to do today then was to look at part 2, and tomorrow I'll do part 3. So part 2 of this deals with the issue of conflict and some of the challenges of conflict in the work environment. Okay, we've got serious issues when we run into conflict. And, here's an example of George Costanza. He was the #1 conflict man.
Hey, you're stealing my space.
George, wait, you don't know who this guy is. People kill for a parking space in the city.
No, he's not getting away.
George!
What are you doing? I think I'm parking my car. You can't do that. You can't just sneak in from the back like that. I'm not sneaking. I didn't even know you were parking. You were just sitting there 3 spaces up. Well, if you didn't think I was parking, why did you put it in head first? Well, that's the way I park. Anyway, you didn't start backing in until I pulled in. I was in the middle of a conversation. Hey, buddy, what can I tell you? Right. The point is, I was here first. I was closer to this space than you were. But I'm backing in. You can't put it in head first. I can if I have room. Are you going to move the car? No, I'm not going to move the car. Jerk. Oh, you're not?
Come on, we'll put it in the garage.
I'm not putting it in the garage. It's my space.
What are you going to do? You're just going to leave it here like this? I'm going upstairs.
Are you coming back then?
Yeah, I got to tell Jerry we're here. I got to go to the bathroom.
Just make sure he reserves the good chair for me. What were you going to tell him about the clanking noise in the car?
Me? No, you. You're going to tell him. I'm not going to tell you.
Come on, you're good at this.
What am I going to say?
I don't know. You'll think of something. Just go to the bathroom, Jerry.
Yeah, so that's the kind of conflict that you roll into with the George Costanzas of the world and his ill-bit father. So what exactly is conflict? It's really conflict amongst two people, okay? Or it could be multiples, but normally it's two people. And what we talk about, we call that interpersonal conflict. It's a process that occurs when one person, group, or organization subunit frustrates the goal attainment of another. So we just seen George try to pull into the parking space, and the other guy was pulling in at the same time. And in New York City, very difficult to get parking spaces. So as a result, there's a lot of stress there a lot of times with regards to where you're going to park your car. So in its classic form, conflict often involves antagonistic attitudes, such as we saw with George, and behaviors such as name-calling, sabotage, and even physical aggression, which we've seen all examples in that little clip. Well, what causes this conflict? It's impossible to say that there's any one thing, but there tends to be a number of factors that contribute to organizational conflict. And the first one is the fact that I call it the we-they scenario. And this we-they scenario happens a lot in every event that every organization I've ever been involved in, and any group. The we they scenario is what we call group identification for the we, and the bias that exists against the they. So this is a tendency of people to develop a more positive view of their own group and a less positive view of outgroups of which they are not a member. Now, this is not a really good example, but it is a really good example. It's not a really good example of what people do, but it's a really good example of this group conflict. We're into our second week of lockdown now, and the first week, or last 2 Friday nights ago, Janice Fitzgerald got on and she said, you know, we've got a situation where we've got an outbreak of the coronavirus, this highly volatile type, and it's originating out of Mount Pearl and Mount Pearl schools. And we saw social media blow up with people nasty comments towards the kids in Mount Pearl schools, people who lived in Mount Pearl, people who lived in St. John's. It was the Bay versus the Townies. It was crazy. It was crazy. And this is what you see whenever you see this type of conflict. It's a group, an identifiable group, people who don't live in St. John's or don't live in the greater metro area, against people who live in the greater metro area. And we saw this people not being very nice. And so this tendency appears to develop even when group membership is essentially arbitrary. There's no real, the Bayman versus the Townie, it's an arbitrary thing. But the best prognosis is that people who identify with some groups will tend to be leery of out-group members. And this concept of conflict, or this understanding of conflict, the people who have a good understanding of human psychology have used this to their advantage for years. As I say, the we-they scenario has been a very powerful tool by politicians. Donald Trump was a classic example of this. What we do is we focus on bad people. He didn't use complicated language, simple language. Bad people. And they could be Chinese, Muslim, it didn't matter. Pick your enemy, but they were deemed, and very simple terms used to define them as bad people. And we then are good people, and they are not us. It is creating divisions, and we see it in schools, we see it in towns, we see it everywhere. And this is one of the biggest breeders of conflict, and it has empowered a lot of people because what they can do is turn people against one another. So we got to be wary about group identification. It's good to be members of a group, but the question is, does that serve the purpose of the group, or does it serve some other purpose? Another big cause of conflict, and this has been one I can relate to. I don't get mad very often, but at the college, I've run into a situation where we have something called interdependence. And this happened a long time ago, where a course was set up, a special course was set up for a bunch of students. And I forget what it was, maybe it was WIMIS or something like that. Anyway, someone came and told me that I had to teach this course in 10 minutes. I didn't know anything about it. So this is where we get into someone's relying on someone to do something in order to be able to do their job. So this is what we mean by interdependence. You are dependent on someone else to do their job. Now, I would have hoped back when that happened that someone would have done their job by telling me that this was coming up, but nobody told me. And their omission became my problem. So interdependence happens a lot in organizations where you're dependent on someone else to do their work so you can get yours done. Because you might be a very diligent worker, but if you're relying on that other person to get the job done, they don't do it. It interferes with your ability to do your job. So when individuals or subunits are mutually dependent on each other to accomplish other tasks or goals, the potential for conflict exists. So the potential for abuse of power in such relationships and the ongoing need for coordination are both potential problem areas. If that mystery person out there realizes that you're dependent on them and that the value of your work or what you do is dependent on what they do, they have control over you because they can slow down or speed up their work to cause you pleasure or grief. And interdependence happens in businesses all the time because the way businesses are set up, normally one party is relying on another party to do their job. The problem is that this leads to conflict because of the fact that people cannot necessarily do their job. You've been in groups. All of you have been in groups. And you know that if one member doesn't pull their weight, that interferes with everyone else. Again, group interdependence is a problem. We also got differences in power, status, and culture, and we've seen examples of this over the last in the communications section. Some people are more powerful than others. They've been around longer, they're older, they have more experience, they're richer, they're louder, whatever you want to call it, they have more power. And as a result, they normally have a higher status. And certain cultures too are people, some cultures are very loud. Some cultures are very passive. This is going to lead to some conflict. And you can imagine that if you've got very powerful people working with not so powerful people, that the not so powerful people are going to feel as if they've been taken advantage of very quickly. Or if the status of the lower status people are just the peons of the higher status people, there will be resentment. So this causes conflict. So we've seen, I got this fleshed out a little bit more, power, dependence on one side that is not necessarily reflected in the other. So it's an imbalance in power can arise. Status differences have a great potential for conflict where a reversal of expected roles occurs. That is, when a higher status person, like an executive, finds themselves being educated on computer usage by their administrative assistant. Some executives are defensive about this role reversal. Culture, where two or more different cultures develop in an organization and there's a clash between them. Another big thing that causes conflict, and again, I can relate well to this one too, is ambiguity. Ambiguity means that things are not clear. Depending on how you look at them, you can look at them one way, you can look at them another way. So ambiguous goals, jurisdictions, performance, more than one boss. So you got a boss telling you to do one thing and someone else telling you to do something different. Can lead to conflict. Under such ambiguity, the formal and informal roles that govern interaction break down, and it may be difficult to determine responsibility. Who's responsible? Who am I responsible to? Who's responsible for getting this done? So ambiguous performance criteria are a frequent cause of conflict between superiors and subordinates. I thought you were doing that. That sort of thing rolls into problems. Another one, and one that often is put together purposely, is something called scarce resources. Scarce resources means that there's not enough money, time, effort, and energy to get a project done. But we still need to get the project done. So, wow, how are we going to do that? Very difficult. Well, it gets people upset. So differences in power are magnified when common resources are in short supply. Resources may act as buffers in sufficient quantities, which, when removed, allow conflict to surface. You remember the great toilet paper disappearing act of COVID, right? Oh, it's so hard to get toilet paper. None around, and people would kill for toilet paper. So, there's all kinds of potential problems that can emerge in an organization that can cause conflict. So basically, these all boil down to different goals, different facts, different procedures, just differences. So disputes over goals are very common in organizations. Disputes over facts are very frequently arise in technical situations. Disputes over procedures generally center around one party's expectations about the other party and how they should behave. Being aware of these different types of conflict may make you sensitive to the need to be sure that you understand what a conflict episode really is all about. So, this is not supposed to solve and prevent conflicts. This is supposed to give you some understanding why conflicts occur and what you can do to minimize the chances of them occurring. Recognizing a conflict is over a goal definition rather than a simple question of fact will go a long way towards approaching a resolution. So it's a different perspectives again. It's also important to understand that framing issues may mean different things to different people and categorize the problem differently. Trying to see conflict from someone else's point of view is often useful. A number of events occur when one or more of the causes of conflict take effect. So as conflict begins, winning becomes very important. The parties conceal information from each other. Each group becomes more cohesive. Contact with the opposite party is discouraged. Negative stereotypes is often there. We see that talking about the other group. Aggressive leaderships sometimes cause problems. So based on the internal dynamics, the elements of this process work against the achievement of peaceful situation, and it doesn't help an organization. So what can we do to manage conflict? Well, 5 conflict management styles exist amongst people. Okay, the first one is avoiding. So avoiding conflict is just staying away from it. So avoiding conflict management style characterized by low assertiveness in one's own interest and low cooperation with the other party. So this is the hiding your head in the sand response to conflict. So it's not very effective, but people often do it. We don't want to deal with the problem, we'll just avoid the problem. Accommodating is the opposite end of the stream, where accommodation is conflict management style in which one party cooperates with the other party while not asserting one's own interests. So this may be seen as a sign of weakness. Okay, so we've got the opposite end where you just say, whatever, I'll roll over. Competing is another one, where competing is a conflict management style that maximizes assertiveness for your own position and minimizes cooperative responses. So it's an I win, you lose scenario. So it's very stressful in organizations when that is the case. And then we got compromise. Compromise is a conflict management style that combines intermediate levels of assertiveness and cooperation. It tends to be a satisfying approach, somewhat neither true competition nor true accommodation. Compromises does not always result in the most creative response to conflict, but it does act as a response. Probably the best one is collaborating, where the conflict management style where we try to create a win-win. And that is where we maximize both groups. So collaboration works as a problem-solving approach where the object is to determine a win-win solution to a conflict that fully satisfies the interest of both parties. It assumes that the solution to the conflict can leave both parties in a better condition. That's hard. Collaboration is hard. It is much harder than the others, but it is the most effective one to resolve the conflict. So effective collaboration frequently enhances productivity and achievement. Collaboration between organizational departments is particularly important for providing good customer service. The thing is that a lot of our traditional systems, the budgeting system, the human resource reward system, is all set up for the other ones that we saw, not for collaborating. The last thing that I just wanted to talk about here was the merits of conflict. Conflict is not always bad. A moderate amount of conflict can help create and stimulate ideas, okay? Where we have conflict, and that provides an operation or an ability to create change and adaptation to survival. The COVID situation is a classic example of that. We got a certain degree of conflict in people's minds, but it has allowed for a lot of change to happen very quickly. So that is the section on conflict. Tomorrow, I will look at negotiation, and we'll clue up this section. We've talked about conflict, and conflict is best resolved when we look to collaborate, work together. So negotiation is really a process where we try to resolve the conflict that results from one person wanting something and another one needing to give something for it. So negotiation is really all about a certain type of conflict that, depending on how we approach it, through competing or collaboration, it can be successful. So just by way of example.
It's $1.89. Why is there no haggling in this country?
I guess we like to think we've progressed from a knife fight for a citrus drink.
Not me. Everything should be negotiable.
Restaurants too?
Absolutely. You telling me there's no room to move on pasta? All starches are a scam.
Yeah, especially ziti with that big hole.
I shouldn't. How much is this? $1.19? I'll give you a quarter. Get the hell out of here.
Tell them 40 and no fork.
30. That's it. You leave and never come back.
How about we leave and come back in a week?
Deal. All right. See? We got something there.
George Costanza is probably not a good example of how to be a good negotiator. But that was, I zapped it a little bit earlier. So one of the things we're going to look at today is how to negotiate and the different methods of negotiating. And generally, those methods fall into two major categories. We call it distributive negotiation. Okay, so we're going to look at, I'll just go down here and look at that. Distributive negotiation assumes a zero sum, meaning I win, you lose. The pot is only so big. I have most of the pot, or you have most of the pot. So distributive negotiation is not considered to be a good way to do things, right? There's a fixed amount of stuff that we're going to get out of it, and we're going to fight to the death in order to get to that point. So distributive negotiation is essentially a single issue negotiation. Reaching an acceptable resolution in distributive negotiation involves both parties arriving at a point in a settlement range, an area of overlap between one party's target interest and the other party's target interest. So several techniques can be used to influence how this point is determined. The first one is threats and promises. Threats consist of implying punishment. Promises are pledges of concessions will lead to some reward in the future. So you could think of this in, for example, contract negotiations at work, where we're in a union, we're thinking about going on strike, and we're negotiating. So we want a fairly large salary increase. Management don't want to give that very large salary increase. So the threat is management says, well, if I give you a salary increase, I'm going to have to lay people off. That's a threat. Or the promise is, if you guys agree to take this little amount, I won't lay anyone off. So that's the kind of thing we talk about with regards to threats and promises in distributed negotiation. At the end of it, someone wins and someone loses. We also have, in terms of distributive, how firm a group party is. You know, how firm are you versus how much are you willing to give in terms of concessions. So intransigence is just, I'm not moving a bit. This is the line in the sand. I'm not going past that. So a lot of negotiations end right there because there is no room to move. You know, it's deadlocking. So sometimes small concessions can move move the process along, and you know, if you agree to give a little bit, someone else will agree to give a little bit, and this will help move things. There's also persuasion, which is verbal persuasion, is debate in common negotiations. It's an attempt to change the attitudes of the other. So I'll just go back to Mr. Seinfeld here.
All right, see, we got something there.
So, what are you guys doing for dinner?
We had no plans.
Look at that, Helen. Do you see what he's wearing? That's the executive.
What is the executive?
The beltless trench coat. My father invented it. I sure did. Raincoats for my business. The executive was a classic. These haven't been made in 20 years.
Why would they? Nobody bought them then.
He's wearing one.
Yeah, these are a hot item at Rudy's.
You don't say. You know, I have boxes of those sitting in my garage in Florida.
Get them up here.
You give me 25%. I'll take care of everything. You got a deal.
Yeah, right.
This is like the meeting of Smith and Wesson.
Apparently the Seinfelds are too good for us. Shouldn't say anything bad about your partner.
No, you know, we're not really partners. I only get 25%.
25%? That was your idea.
Yeah, I know.
He's doing all the legwork.
That's right.
He's ripping you up.
You're right. He's ripping me off.
If anybody should be getting more, it's you.
He's ripping me off.
Well, don't let him take advantage of you like that.
You know, I've been thinking. Why is Kramer getting 25%?
Well, he told you about the place.
So what? Why is that worth 25%? It's a finder's fee. You know what a finder's fee is?
You find something, you get a fee.
Finder's fee is 10%, no more.
Well, it's too late now.
Those are my coats. I saved them, I stored them. I've been waiting years for this payoff.
Well, you're not going to say anything.
I've been thinking about something. Yeah, so have I don't think the deal is fair. You don't think it's fair? No. I found the place. I set the whole thing up. I'm doing all the legwork. What? Legwork?
Oh, there's legwork.
If anything, you're getting too much. Too much? That's right. They're my coats.
Hey, look, I want 35%.
I'm thinking more like 15.
No way I'm taking 15.
Well, you're not getting 35.
All right, let's compromise. 25%.
Okay, it's a deal.
Yeah, so you can see that's a type of an example of distributive where everybody is kind of given a little. Now the problem with the distributive negotiation is it creates animosity, right? So it's probably not to be considered one of the best examples. And I have another little video here just to show you a more defined.
Hello, Ben. Can I explain any negotiation approaches?
Professor Siegfried, what is distributive negotiations?
Well, Ben, distributive negotiations are when two sides to the negotiation assume that the value pi is fixed and haggle over one item, typically price. With this approach, each party views gains for one party as coming at the expense of the other and acts accordingly.
Thanks, Professor, for explaining distributive negotiations.
So you win, I lose. Okay, so that's distributive. What is preferred, however, because of the problems with distributive, what is preferred is something called integrative or integrative negotiations. And effectively, what that's trying to do is to make both parties better off. Okay, so instead of one wins, the other one loses, what we're trying to do in integrative negotiations is to make both parties win. And we can do that. A number of factors can help make that happen with lots of information. So parties need to get it away, need to be full of information. Everybody's aware of it. Trust is built. People know where people are coming from. Positions are well communicated. Everybody knows what the situation with everyone else is. So there's no hidden cards, hidden agenda. Framing differences as opportunity. Differences need to be met not as mutually exclusive options. We need to explore them for opportunities to satisfy both parties without compromise. We could also think about cutting costs. If you need somehow to cut costs and the other party associated with an agreement, the chance of an integrative settlement increases. Integrative solutions are especially attractive when they reduce costs from all parties in a dispute. So if we can get more for less, all the better. Increasing resources also helps. The ultimate solution to a fixed pie problem is to make pie bigger. So if we can say, okay, let's increase the amount of things that we all get out of this, integrated bargaining works better. And also introducing what's called superordinate goals. This is the higher level goals, are attractive outcomes that can be achieved only by collaboration. Neither party can achieve the goal on its own. So superordinate goals represent the best example of creativity in integrative negotiations because they change the entire landscape. So everybody benefits. Here's an example.
Now that we know there is a more effective and friendlier alternative to the old-fashioned win-lose negotiation technique, we can learn more about how to be great at interest-based negotiations. Before we jump into strategies to expand the pie, we should talk briefly about the common misconceptions and errors related to interest-based negotiations. Okay, first, people tend to enter negotiations believing the interests of their own party are entirely incompatible with the desires of the other party. This is overwhelmingly often not the case and only hinders the negotiation. When both parties miss out on the shared value they can gain, they end up reaching what is known as a lose-lose agreement. As you can tell, this is the exact opposite of what we want. Second, the notion that negotiations are inherently a redistribution of fixed resources, or for me to win, you must make a sacrifice type of relationship is dangerously engraved in people's minds and reduces flexibility a lot. You must try and remember the pie is not fixed, and a tartlet and a cupcake can also be added to the table. If you manage to sidestep this cognitive obstacle, you will be more effective in developing an accurate understanding of what is actually on offer and what the other party's interests are. And finally, reaching a win-win is not a must. If you enter the negotiations determined to reach a win-win, you will put unnecessary pressure on the conversation. In addition, you should leave any urge to compromise at the door. Concessions are an element of win-lose negotiations. Here, we're trying to create a new pie, not divide a few pieces. And be careful not to reveal your BATNA. Revealing it might work during distributive negotiations, but has no value here. Cooperation isn't equal to laying all your cards on the table, right? Great. We know the no-nos for interest-based effectiveness. Now let's talk about strategies for expanding the pie and adding those extra desserts. Probably the most crucial technique for successful interest-based negotiations is perspective taking. This is the most straightforward way to understand your partner's interests and where they're coming from. If you are successful, you will be much more informed and better at solving problems mid-negotiation or answering their attempts to set an anchor. So, how do you go about facilitating perspective taking? Simple. Ask diagnostic questions. You can try with the W questions that invite an open response, like what, why, when, where, and their non-W cousin, how. These provide a non-threatening way to get information, unlike closed-ended questions, which often inspire defensive behavior and encourage the other party to misrepresent facts or even lie. But remember, negotiations are a back-and-forth process, and this means you must provide your partner with knowledge about what you're after and what your priorities are. It's only fair, right? And not just that, if you disclose information about your party, it will signal that you are approaching these negotiations openly, which will invite the principle of reciprocation to enter play. If your counterpart still hasn't shared information, chances are they will now. In addition to probing with diagnostic questions, it is also very important to engage in active listening. This allows you to make deductions about your counterparty's interests, even if they're not being completely open with you. And more importantly, you will get a sense of what their preferences are and how they rank. Another valuable thing you can do is trying to make package deals. Package deals are useful for two reasons. They allow the negotiating parties to come up with trade-offs between individual issues, and they make reaching an impasse much less likely. Apart from package deals, you can also aim to think about different offers you can make that hold the same value for you and make them simultaneously. This both creates the impression of flexibility and makes it easier and more likely to uncover mutually beneficial issues, useful and not super difficult. The only ingredient you need is, and we know you've never heard this one before, preparation. A major difference between interest-based and distributive negotiating is that in interest-based situations, the fact that both sides don't want the same things can be exploited. In fact, it is encouraged. This drives finding issues to trade to find mutual value. For example, there is a package deal on the table consisting of X, Y, and Z issues. You are interested in Z, whereas your party wants to get X and Y. You can choose to trade off X and Y to gain Z, effectively reaching an integrated win-win decision. Neat, huh? And if trade-offs are not happening immediately, we can give you a hint that should facilitate the process when assessing and expanding the issues on the table. Try to focus on the ones that are highly valuable to you, and not so much for your bargaining partner. Point it out. Voila! A possible trade-off should emerge.
Okay, so effectively, we have to be aware, in summary, of two types of negotiation, distributive and integrative. Distributive assumes that the pie is only so big. If I get more, you get less. Integrative says, look, the pie can be expanded. Let's increase the volume of things that we can talk about, and we can all come to a mutually agreeable solution based on that.